Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm Mike Clancy, Be Bold America's co-host. Our program today is Every Voter Deserves a Voice That Matters, and we will be talking with nationally recognized leader in election law and voter rights, attorney Chad Peace, about his work as a legal advisor to the Independent Voter Project. The Independent Voter Project, IVP, is a nonpartisan reform organization that promotes fair participation for independent-minded voters. IVP is focused on three reforms. 1, allowing open primaries for every voter. Over 26 million Americans are locked out of primary elections simply because they refuse to join a political party. The Independent Voter Project is leading the fight to change that. 2, giving voters more choice at the ballot box. When elections offer only two viable choices, voters settle. More choice voting advances reforms that expand the field, increase the competition, and force candidates to earn broader support. And 3, ending super PACs. 74.9% of Maine voters said yes to capping super PAC donations at $5,000. Now IVP is defending that law in court and building the legal framework to take the fight to all 50 states. We have big things to do. Our interviewed guest today is Chad Peace. Chad is an attorney, media executive, and election reform advocate based in San Diego. He is the founder of IVC Media, a digital strategy and public affairs firm working with corporate, nonprofit, and political clients, and a partner at Peace & Shea LLP, where his legal work focuses on election law and voter participation. Chad has been involved in national and state efforts to expand access for independent voters, including litigation, ballot initiatives, and public education. He's a frequent commentator on election reform and political systems and co-hosts the Independent Voter Podcast. Hello, Chad. Welcome to Be Bold America.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Chad, first of all, thank you for all you do to protect voter rights and promote voter participation. Given the tremendous political divide gripping our country and the threats to democracy we face, the reforms being pursued by the Independent Voter Project seem right on target. Please tell our listeners about the IVP and your role in it.
Yeah, well, IVP was first formed in 2006. It was really after California used to have the open blanket primary. Essentially, you had the parties' primaries all on the same ballot, and a voter could, vote for a Democrat for Senate and then a Republican for Assembly and vice versa. Well, in the case Democratic Party v. Jones, the Democratic Party led it, and then the Republican Party joined them, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and they said, that violates our private right of association for you to allow these non-loyal voters to vote in our primaries. And the Supreme Court agreed. In the concurring opinion, they said, well, if you really wanted to have full participation of everybody in the primary, then you should simply have a nonpartisan primary. And so that's why IVP was formed. And 4 years later, by strokes of luck and coincidence and timing and everything, we got the top two nonpartisan primary on the ballot, and it passed. Yeah. And, at that time, we had several folks in our reform space were divided over that. A lot of them didn't like it. A lot of third parties didn't like it because it requires a fundamental shift in the way we view elections, right? What people don't question across the country is we know now that primaries are really the most important stage of the election, right? Mm-hmm. That a combination of gerrymandering and just geography. By the time you get to the general election, it doesn't matter.
I'm not sure that's a good thing, but it's definitely true.
Right, and so that's our argument. When now you take it to our legal argument, and why did we focus on the nonpartisan primary in California first? Is saying, look, if we all agree that's an important part of the public election process that's paid for by taxpayers, how do you require somebody to forfeit their First Amendment right to not join an organization they don't agree with?
Yeah.
Why did they have to forfeit their right to vote if they don't join a party? And that's the basis of our lawsuit, right? And what's important, though, I think, is more than just the law. We do fundamentally believe it's a voting rights issue, but it's also a direct consequence of the hyper-partisanship.
Yes.
Right? And so we believe that is also the solution. We can debate about every issue we want, but the reason, and we end up in these hyper-partisan discussions about it, is because our election process has been designed in a way that we're electing leaders all across the country whose job is to champion, the most strident positions rather than reach more voters.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. It kind of brings up the gerrymandering arms race that's been going on.
Exactly.
And it seems to me that the long-term outcome of that will be the blue districts get bluer, the red districts get redder, and the purple districts tend to go away. Do you agree
100%.
with that?
100%.
Yeah.
And that's exactly, it's been going on. And then, we had, the president put some gasoline on a fire that was already burning, right? I think and then the Democrats go and add more gasoline, right? And then they point fingers at each other. But to your point, it's an arms race, and you're exactly right. What it does is it just further pushes the incentives out to be more and more partisan, where it's more important to getting elected is to just go lockstep with your party than it is to go lockstep with your constituency.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the issue.
Yeah, and you see that happening all over the place.
Right.
The IVP states right up front on its website, quote, "The right to vote derives from citizenship, not upon affiliation with a political party," unquote.
That's right.
I think that's a very simple yet powerful statement. What does it mean to you?
Well, I mean, it's actually, I think, broader than just the stuff we're talking about. Is that, I mean, even if when I went to law school and studied, part of the reason I came up with this legal strategy is you look at the body of laws, and then you go talk to folks in the political science space, and they talk it through the lens of the parties, that political parties are the vehicles to participation, right? But what's unique about the United States, we can argue about whether it's right or wrong, but the United States rejected a more parliamentary system because they're concerned about the dangers of factionalism, right? Now, when you make the first stage and important stages of the election process require you to join a political party, that means that the political parties are really the building blocks of democracy, right?
Yep.
Step one, you need to join the party. Step two, you get engaged. Our position is no. The foundation of democracy is people. It's in the name, right?
Yeah.
And that unless people are the building blocks, individuals who can then associate or not associate, like we're very party agnostic. Like a lot of people think we're anti-party. I go, no. Actually, if you take what we believe to its logical extension, we think parties will get stronger with a nonpartisan system, not because they're going to have more seats. There's only a set amount of seats. It'll be because they will have the support of more people. Right now, I think the parties are really weak, even though they hold all the offices, because nobody likes them.
That's true. I think the polling shows that.
Right.
Yeah, speaking of participation, I know voter participation is a big part of what you do. About 90 million eligible voters failed to vote in the last presidential election, and that stands in contrast to the difference in the popular vote between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris of only about 2 million votes. Why is it that so many people don't show up at the polls, and what can be done about that?
Well, I use the analogy a lot. I go, well, so you got the right to be a vegetarian, but if I told you the only way you can eat is if you have a hamburger or hot dog, some of those vegetarians are probably just going to starve, right? Is that they don't feel like there's a meaningful vote. And going back to our discussion about primaries, if you say by the time you get to the general election, it's really just a symbolic vote and you're not going to change anything, there's a lot of people that say, okay, I got my bills to pay, I got my kids I got to take to soccer, I got all this kind of stuff. Am I going to go and just take my time to do something I know means nothing? And then there's a portion of those that is their expression. That is their vote. Their vote is not participating and saying this system is so unrepresentative, I'm not even going to engage in it. Right? And so, we have to find reason to give people...
That doesn't bode well for our democracy, you know?
No, it doesn't.
As you know, Trump has been pushing hard to have the Senate pass the so-called Save America Act. This bill does 5 main things. 1, it requires proof of citizenship to register to vote. 2, it requires photo ID to cast a ballot. 3, it requires that state officials remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. 4, it requires that states submit their complete voter rolls to the Trump administration. And 5, it creates new penalties against election officials. Republicans say that this legislation is needed to prevent election fraud, while Democrats say that it is designed to make it harder for Democratic-leaning people to vote. What's your view on the Save America Act?
Right. Well, IVP, we're very careful to stay out of we're taking a position on the partisans' positions, right? Because a part of our argument is that, these Democrats and Republicans will put goalposts and then say, which goalpost are you at? You're like, well, who said that those are the only goalposts you can have, right? But I think this issue really highlights a lot of the problems with everything, right? We all know that if you just poll just generally, do people believe in some form of ID or proving who they are to vote? Whatever side you're on, the polling shows it is about 80%, right? But then, so what happens is you have the Republican Party and the president, and I'll pick on them just as much as anybody else. They go, oh, this is an opportunity to go, we know we have an 80-20 issue. Let's shove a little more. Let's make it hard, right? And by the time they put up the bill, it's like, no, what people said was they wanted to have some form of identification. They didn't say you have to dig up your birth certificate to prove, right, to vote. They didn't say you had to do this, right? And it's like they go further to say, how much can I get away with?
Yeah,
right?
They turn it to their advantage.
Right. Instead of saying, hey, we understand these concerns. Let's work the opposite direction, and let's start with a lowest bar we can, right? And then, if we still think we need more, then work our way up. That's how a functioning system would work. But instead, they run, how far can we get and still get 50% plus one, right? Even though most people, even the people that would still be supporting it, are saying to themselves, do we really need all this stuff to accomplish what we said we wanted to accomplish? And your point is no.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of things about requiring a passport and making sure that your name on your ID exactly matches your birth certificate and things like that.
Oh, and putting criminal penalties on and for just the fear alone of do I even want to participate in this system? I get accused of something, and now I'm in criminal court because I'm trying to, and of course, in everything there's bad actors, and that's what we should all be concerned about, right? There's bad actors everywhere. The problem is our partisanship has gotten to a point where everybody goes, well, all the bad actors are on this side, and if you just select this side, then we'll have the good actors, right? Or if you just do this, we'll have all the good, it's not nearly that black and white, right?
Yeah.
There's in the, but we don't. We've made it easier to, make an unholy alliance with a bad actor to advance our political position than to make a genuine alliance with somebody on the other side who may have a different perspective but may have a genuine purpose.
Yes, definitely. Okay, you are listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7, 89.5, and 89.7 FM. Many voices, one station. Live stream globally from the ksqd.org website. The title of our show today is Every Voter Deserves a Voice That Matters, and we're speaking with nationally recognized voting rights advocate and election law attorney Chad Peace, partner at Peace & Shea, LLP, and legal strategist for the Independent Voter Project, IVP. I'm your host, Mike Clancy.
Hey, Tom Hartman here. You know how I always say democracy is not a spectator sport? Well, Jill Cody knows the rules of the game, and she delivers it to you straight on Be Bold America, Friday at 5 p.m. right here on KSQD. Jill brings in the best political thinkers of our time who will show you what to keep doing, stop doing, and start doing to support democracy in our world. That's Be Bold America, Friday at 5 p.m. right after the Tom Hartman program, right here on K-Squid, 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM, and ksqd.org. Tag, you're it.
The title of our show today is Every Voter Deserves a Voice That Matters. And we're speaking with Chad Peace, a partner at Peace and Shea LLP, a nationally known commentator on election reform and political systems, and co-host of the Independent Voter podcast. Now, Chad, in March of this year, Trump issued an executive order that would require states to turn over lists of approved voters to the federal government and direct the Postal Service to only deliver mail-in ballots to people on those lists. Furthermore, it forbade the Postal Service from delivering any mail-in ballots in states that did not turn over their voter list. Last week, a federal judge blocked key elements of this executive order, but of course this ruling could end up being overturned by the Supreme Court, in which case Trump would get his way. What's your take on all of this?
I mean, this obviously is a huge federalism issue here, right? You go back to the way we've designed our elections was to not consolidate power over the election process, right? And that's why the states have wide latitude and governance, right? So I think it's an ironic that you have the party that's supposed to be smaller government is the one demanding, bigger government, and the federal government is taking it all. But then I would also ask the folks that are, supporting that position and say, well, okay, let's take everything you say as true. What happens when the other party's in power? Now they have complete control over all 50 states of the elections. Right. So, be careful what you wish for. I think a lot of times we're fighting these fights in the moment and say, well, if we can just grab the levers of control, then we can win and make sure it goes our way. Well, that's the problem. I think part of it is we got to have the group of America that says, no, we're actually supposed to make it so one group or one person can't pull a single lever and take power away from all 50 states, right? So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I actually think, I don't know, I don't like predicting this stuff, but I think the court will reject it ultimately if it gets there because of the dangers it could pose to democracy. When you consolidate that much power over the fundamental, the fundamental thing that protects our democracy, right?
Yeah.
So I think we give wide latitude to the states, and part of that is some states may do things right, do things wrong, may do them really bad, may do them really good. But over the course of history, when you have 50 states having their own process, then they can fix and do things one by one. But once you put that power in the hands of a single vehicle, one screw up destroys democracy.
Yeah, and kind of building on that theme, Trump recently called for Republicans to nationalize future elections. If this was to happen, effectively ignoring the Constitution's delegation of election administration to the states, what might be the long-term impacts on voting and our democracy?
Well, I think that's the discussion, I was just referring to.
Yeah.
I think that's dangerous. I think that's why the court will ultimately reject it. And the consequence is, right, that's the foundation of democracy and the power, right? And so once you take that away, then you're really taking away statehood itself. Yeah. Right? So that would be my argument, and that's I think is a great opportunity for, the Democratic side, which is generally at least thought of as taking less of constitutional positions, they're completely on the right side of this, I believe. Yeah. They're saying, no, look at our Constitution. If we're going to have United States, which means these states are independent, you cannot nationalize the election process, because at that point you really don't have a state.
Yeah, and kind of ironic that the party that normally talks about states' rights would suddenly be wanting to take away all this power from the states.
Which is arguably the most important power of any, right? Yeah, we can talk about education, we can talk about healthcare, all these other issues that are important. Voting and the elections, they affect everything.
Absolutely.
So it's the most important right. That's why I say I think at its core, it is states' rights. And ultimately, I mean, the Democrats, what I'm saying, I think we're fortunate, at least right now in this respect, that we have a court that I think would not side with the current administration.
Yeah. Okay, so on Monday of this week, Chad, as I'm sure you know, 2 Republican appointees joined the 3 liberal justices on the Supreme Court. in rejecting GOP claims that federal law did not allow states to count postmarked mail-in ballots that arrive at election offices after Election Day. The ruling upheld Mississippi's 5-day mail-in ballot grace period after the U.S. Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had struck it down. What's your view on this decision and on mail-in voting in general?
Well, I think there are live issues, right, which make it right for the court to hear this case. And I think there's things that need to be improved. I mean, California takes way too long to count the ballots. We used to be the fastest, and now we're the slowest. And whether there's fraud or not, it gives it's hard to argue that it hasn't given the appearance of having security, right? You have all this stuff, so there should be changes. But going back to your question, in terms of the court, I think it's right in line with what we had just talked about, right? You say, okay, pump the brakes here. The solution isn't then go and basically do a nationalized solution, say you can't do all this, because there's lots of consequences to it. And, there's consequences to veterans, but there's also consequences to mail-in ballot itself, which, right, there's a lot of legitimate reasons to do it, right? So my position would be, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Is like, I can point out to ways mail-in ballot voting could be abused and not well. But all in all, it's very beneficial in many, many ways, right? So having a ruling to say, there could be mischievous things that happen, therefore we can't do it. Well, if that was our position, then we get rid of anything and everything.
That kind of brings up the issue of voter fraud and the way Trump has been pushing for years now, the idea that there's all this voter fraud going on. Doesn't that undermine people's confidence in the elections and perhaps damage our democracy and make it less likely people are going to vote? What do you think about that?
Well, I do, and that's why I'm going to this California, this just taking this long, even if there's not fraud, it undermines people's confidence, because well, okay, what's going here, right? But that's the issue. It's not the okay, then let's eliminate all this stuff is not the right solution to that. So I think running out there and saying that there's all this fraud, when frankly, especially as it relates to California, if there is or isn't, it's pretty hard to prove either way, right? And so what we ought to be focusing on is, okay, let's accept this election as it is, and what can we do that we can all agree on, can give people more confidence that the next result's going to be good, right? And, I think there's a lot more folks ready to have that discussion, but, the incentives of governance right now, and, we have a very partisanized D.C., is probably not going to find those kinds of resolutions, because right now what gets proposed is something that's going to benefit one side or the other. And we ought to be asking what's going to benefit the voters and our general confidence in our democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. So continuing along the theme of the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court on Tuesday rolled back long-standing limits on the amount of money political parties can spend in coordination with individual candidates for federal office. The ruling is expected to prompt a flood of spending by political parties ahead of the midterm elections. What's your viewpoint on that?
This is an extension of the super PACs issue, and they took basically the same position, and it's just going to be an unlimited amount of money people can essentially, for lack of better terms, launder through the political party, right? And these are some of the things that the average voter doesn't. Maybe there's no reason for them to understand, is that a political party has rights beyond any other organization or individual in the world, right? They can do spending. When we talk about spending in politics, we're generally talking about campaigns and super PACs, but there's tons of money spent in other regards. But the only other real political dollars that are legally allowed to be spent are parties on member communications and lots of things like that. Now, when you can spend an unlimited amount of money that's not reportable as an expenditure to a candidate or anything else, but it's allowed to be political, that's going to, now there's going to be a war between super PACs and political parties. Great, right? All it did is open the floodgates for even more money to come.
Yeah, exactly.
And the argument is, well, the political parties have First Amendment rights as organizations and stuff. But at what point do we say, okay, you don't get to say you have rights as under the First Amendment because you're a collection of individuals who have that right, but the individuals don't have that right. And we also get all these public benefits. We get these special laws written for us. We get our primary elections paid for by us, right? And from those primaries, that's how we determine the general election candidates, right? And that's the problem. You get the courts and the way we've adjudicated our voting rights laws as it relates to political parties versus voters and then at a state has really created a body of law that's given political parties superior rights. And that goes back to why I was saying, and why we say on our homepage, is that if we believe the building blocks of democracy are people, we've got to look and challenge these laws and say, look at these through another lens. What's the consequence on the individual voter when you do these kinds of things?
Yeah, I like that idea. The building blocks of democracy are people. That's really a strong statement. If you were just joining us, we are speaking with attorney Chad Peace, nationally recognized leader in election law and voter rights, and a legal advisor to the Independent Voter Project. So, Chad, let me come back to my questions. The Supreme Court's recent decision to gut what remains of the Voting Rights Act made it much harder for minority voters to challenge congressional redistricting plans. And this resulted in a rush by MAGA Republicans to eliminate majority black congressional districts. Does this signal that we are headed back to the Jim Crow era of racial discrimination, particularly in the South? And if so, what can and should we do about that?
This question, I think, also goes to the core of the presumptions that we've had in court that are looking through the wrong lens. I think there is a component of that, right? But at the end of the day, especially now, the parties are really looking out their self-interest. And I think both sides of the aisle have been utilizing race or against race, right? Saying, okay, well, that block of voters are ours. They tend to vote for us, so let's maximize their voting rights. And that block of voters tends not to, so let's suppress their voting rights, right? But it's looked through this partisan lens of which party is using or abusing the rights of a specific class of voters. And I say, well, the court should step back and ask a fundamentally different question, especially given, look at like a group like Latinos. People keep saying, oh, Latinos, they went with Trump and now they're getting more conservative. And I say, well, then, no, they're not. They're just independent-minded. And in fact, Latinos are the most likely voter to be registered independent. There's independent that and I'd say, what if all these races and different classes of people have a variety of opinions themselves, right? And what we've done is we've put everybody and a lot of the minorities in a box and say, look, your only avenue to participation is through this political party, right? If we didn't have gerrymandered districts, if we didn't have closed primaries, we may have a whole different composition where, one party couldn't suppress the rights of a minority group and another party wouldn't be utilizing that minority group just to extend their power. And so it is a different question. But yes, it's so long as race can be used as a way to suppress one party's influence or increase one's party's influence, the parties are going to play the game. And it's not good for anybody. And I think it actually incentivizes the kind of, racist tactics that you see.
Yeah.
But we ought to figure out how we can remove any incentive to be racist or misogynist or anything when it comes to elections, because you come back to that principle we talked about, and your right to vote derives from citizenship. It shouldn't matter whether you're black or white or gay or straight or a woman.
Yeah.
It's because you're right. It's because you're a citizen.
Yeah, definitely. So next term, the Supreme Court will consider reviving parts of an Arizona law requiring proof of citizenship for voting. The case is RNC versus Mi Familia Vota. It could also give states the green light to conduct mass voter purges of suspected non-citizens in the days and weeks before an election. This case won't likely be settled by the midterms, but it stands to be resolved ahead of the 2028 election. Is this something we should be worried about?
Well, yeah, if the remedy is, or they're saying that to protect it, we need to do mass purges, like, within a time where then you don't have time to reflect and question, that's the problem, is like, why would we have that one, even if everything was legit of them cleaning the rolls, right? But you're always going to have this suspicion. This is like the flip side of the California issue, right? Is people are going to suspect that there's something fishy going on because there's no time to challenge. There's no time to reflect. And frankly, whether the wrong thing might happen simply by mistake, right? Yeah. And then you disenfranchise people by mistake. And that has consequences then on the election. So, yeah, I think there are going to be implications, and I'm hoping that the court will scrutinize those closely, not just in terms of what side it might benefit, but what are the long-term consequences of allowing things that can, create another partisan vehicle to manipulate the system.
Yeah, because there's those bad actors you mentioned earlier that are kind of lurking in the background that can, take advantage of things like that.
Exactly.
Now, Chad, the IVP identifies 5 different types of primaries that are used in elections around the country: closed, semi-closed, semi-open, open, and nonpartisan. In addition, in some states, the primary rules are different for presidential primaries versus congressional primaries. Trying to grasp all that and understand the pluses and minuses of the various approaches seems a bit daunting. Can you give our listeners a brief tutorial on primaries and what the implications are for the different types?
Right. So in primary election, I say you start from, there's kind of a spectrum that you're going to have, right? You start on the left side of it. I think the worst offender would be a purely closed primary. You have Republican states like Florida, and you have Democratic states like New York. They're where I think are the worst offenders, because you're literally disenfranchised from the first stage of the election process, even though you pay for it, by virtue of not joining one of the parties. Like, you literally can't vote. So that's purely closed. You're not part of the primary, you can't vote. Yeah. Then you kind of work your way. There's semi-closed, which gives the party the right to allow a non-member to participate, right? So semi-closed means, hey, the door's closed, but the chairman of the Republican Party or Democratic Party can open it for you.
Is that on an individual basis or for people in general?
Generally for independent voters.
Okay, I got it. All right.
And then you have semi-open, which works the opposite way, where it's open, but a voter would have to request a ballot of one of the parties or the other. Purely open, right, is like Texas, where you can, I guess Texas is arguably semi-open because you actually do have to declare loyalty to the party's primary that you vote in.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have a purely open primary where you can be a tried and true independent and vote in either party's primary because you got a right to cast a vote. And then now you get one step further, which what I would say is the only election system that is based on an equality system, is a nonpartisan system, because it's the only system where every voter and every candidate is treated exactly the same. Yeah. There's nobody gets any, you can talk about, the advantages of a political party, and those are external to the state itself. The state is not giving anybody a particular advantage. That's a nonpartisan primary, and those are fundamentally different because in those primaries, every voter can vote for any candidate regardless of party, and the purpose is not to advance one Democrat to represent the Democrats in this race and a Republican on this race and so on. The purpose is just to narrow the candidate field. And the party is agnostic, which is why you see some of these discussions about, we have 2 Democrats or 2 Republicans. That's not because the system benefited one party or the other. It's just that's just what happened. That's what happens when you have agnosticism. Yeah.
And is that the approach that IVP is advocating?
Yes, correct. And IVP, to be transparent, we authored California's nonpartisan primary. That was the first big thing we did.
Right.
And now, right, this is a great highlight of the issue, is they manufactured a narrative that two Republicans might advance in the gubernatorial, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was a narrative manufactured by Democratic Party operatives. Why?
Mm.
Because they were going to go and they were going to file their undo the top two initiatives, right? And say, look, you fear that this system could have possibly given you two Republican candidates, so we ought to scrap it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, look who's behind this undo the top two. They don't say undo the top two nonpartisan primary because they don't want people to know they're trying to get rid of a nonpartisan primary. That's their agenda because they want to control it again, right? But look who's behind it. It's party operatives who control significant special interests on the left and the right, right? You have very powerful Democratic operatives, and then you have literally the former chair of the Republican Party partnered. They can't agree on anything other than getting rid of a nonpartisan primary. And we asked the photo a question, say, okay, you don't like that is a legitimate unintended consequence that could happen. We didn't create a perfect system. We just tried to advance it something better than the old system. The answer isn't to go back to a worse system. Look at there's all this talk about New York. New York had 9% voter turnout. 9. Mm-hmm. And now a lot of those candidates that won are de facto elected, right? Because there's not real competition in the general election. Say what you want about California, but we're pushing 40%.
Yeah.
Right? That's 4 times New York. So our point is, though, we've offered another solution. We have a large coalition of lots of different organizations in this space that say, look, you want to undo the top two, the answer is not to go back. The answer is advance 4 or 5 candidates to the general election and use ranked choice voting. Right? Mm-hmm. That's a way so that you won't end up with that kind of result. And you'd also expand the conversation. You would encourage to have a better discussion, right? But so that is the question, well, what is their real intentions if they don't like top two, but their only solution is to go back to a purely closed system where you literally have to join the party to vote at the first stage of the election?
Yeah. Okay, good discussion. All right, it's time to take a break. You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 89.5, 89.7, and 90.7 FM. Many voices, one station. I'm Mike Clancy, Be Bold America's co-host.
This Saturday, starting at 11 a.m., join Eric Nelson and local literary hero Wallace Bain for a 3-hour July 4th celebration. For the first hour, Wallace will unpack his great new novel, Founding Daughter, a what-if masterpiece that asks the provocative question, what if our Declaration of Independence was really ghostwritten by a brilliant 16-year-old African-American girl? What if indeed? And then we fire off a carefully curated 2-hour musical celebration of our 250th anniversary. It's a What a Grateful Dead Zone July 4th special, and it ignites at 11 a.m. this Sunday at KSQD.
Exploring the intersections of rhythmic music from New Orleans, Kingston, Jamaica, and Havana, Cuba. The Downbeat Shuffle program, Fridays at 6 p.m. on KSQD.
The title of our show today is Every Voter Deserves a Voice That Matters, and we're speaking with nationally recognized voting rights advocate and election law attorney Chad Peace, partner at Peace and Shea LLP and legal strategist for the Independent Voter Project, IVP. Now, Chad, according to a CNN poll conducted in May by SSRS, nearly half of Americans say they don't consider themselves a part of either political party. Independents, in fact, have grown to 40% of the population, rising roughly 10 points since just after Trump's first term as president. What do you think that means?
Well, I think you've seen this happening steadily for the last several decades, and it's kind of really catalyzed recently, especially among the younger generations and Latinos. Well, frankly, Latino voters on average are younger than the populace as a whole, and so that's probably part of it. But you're really seeing that people are rejecting. They're looking at the hyper-partisanship. They're looking at their choices on both sides, and then we have lives that are so intertangled now with a combination of social media and just the interconnectedness of society. I think especially younger voters who like didn't grow up with any sense of identity as, oh, I have a Republican family or a Democratic family, are going, everything in my life I don't look at through this black and white lens, and I don't have these friends where I disagree with them, and then I suggest that they must be evil motived, right? And like, that's not how my life works. Why does politics have to work that way? And they're rejecting it. I think the only reason that number actually, you notice that the self-identification number is much higher than the registration number, and that's natural and predictable because. Like, we ran a poll in New York right after the primary asking just Democrats, why are you a Democrat? 40% said I'm not a Democrat. I just registered Democrat so I could vote in the primary.
Yeah.
Among Latinos, that number was 60%, 60, right? And so that doesn't mean they're Republicans. That doesn't mean they're conservatives or MAGA. It just means, look, I don't really think that party that's just the only vehicle. That's the only vehicle I can get in to drive down the street, right? So our question is, why are those the only two vehicles, and why do you have to jump in to one of them in order to participate in democracy if people are the foundation?
Yeah. Well, people who identify as independent voters, do they tend to be in the middle, sort of bridging the gap between the left and the right?
I think that is a total misnomer. Well, look at the issue on the undo the top two. Where's the middle?
Yeah.
Right? Both sides wanted to close the primary. Look at money in politics, right? Look at the, the stock trading. Right? There's no middle there. I think moderation is not what most people are, right? You can look at an average and a median, right, and pick somebody, but any study you're doing when you're finding the median, there's dots. Far left, far right, in the middle, up and down, right? The definition of independence is they're independent, right? And they just don't want to say, hey, I agree on this issue, and therefore the only way to advance that issue is to also agree with this with a whole bunch of other issues that I absolutely don't agree with, right? And so I think that's the issue, is people are just saying, look, life's not a monolith. It's not black and white.
Yeah.
There's nuance. And then, right, and going back to, you're talking about the Supreme Court case, I think this is the problem that's being struggled with within the courts right now, is that we have these fundamental, classifications that demand strict scrutiny, and they should, right, race and gender and these, but we need to start demanding strict scrutiny for simply the individual right to vote. Right, and although the court has articulated that we have the fundamental right to vote, they say it very stridently, we don't treat it with strict scrutiny, because if we did, a lot of these issues would change, and we wouldn't have to look at, does disenfranchising Latinos help Democrats or Republicans? That shouldn't be the question, right? The question should be, are we disenfranchising anybody, and is that decrease their influence on everything, whether it's the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, Congress, local government, right? That's the lens we should be viewing it through.
Yeah, getting back to this middle voter thing, I mean, it's a little bit worrisome to me if there is no middle anymore. If in fact we don't have a middle between the hard left and hard right. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is what you're getting is not, quote unquote, a middle, right?
Okay.
And you have all the points, you have the individual voters, but that's why democracy works, is if you have faith in democracy, you believe in the aggregate, you get better representation that tends to be more in the median or something that's looking at all the points of views and all the dots, or at least is incentivized to, right? And that, I think, a shorthand of saying that's a median or a middle or something works, right? But it's really more about a middle ground of representation, right? Which may not be right in the middle of your map, but it's an aggregate perspective of all the dots on the map, if that makes sense.
Well, polling consistently indicates that Democrats are very concerned about the future of our democracy, but Republicans are not. At least it's not high on their list of concerns. Why is that?
Well, I think that's because the Republicans currently have the White House and in Congress and the Senate, even albeit by minuscule margins, right? But I think if the circumstances were switched, you'd see the responses being flipped.
I see.
But I think going back to the discussions we had earlier, I think if we had an honest discussion about things rather than which side it's going to help, but what are the consequences on democracy? I mean, take that issue we're talking about national. How the heck are conservatives suggesting that nationalizing elections is what's needed to protect democracy?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just ideologically inconsistent. And so I think we've gotten to the point that's the danger of hyperpartisan, because the folks that are not taking the time to just stop and say, wait, does this even make sense with my own supposed view of the world?
Yeah.
It doesn't. And that's the danger to democracy. But I actually think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, because behind all this hyperpartisanship, I think you're seeing new coalitions and new people working with each other that have never worked with each other before.
That's good.
But the manifestation of them working together and having an impact on the political process is slower, right? So hopefully it catches up before it's too late.
Yeah. Well, how do you think the war in Iran will affect the midterm elections?
Well, I mean, you say once you get into issues, I have my own personal opinions. I think there's legitimate, independent-minded reasons on all sides of the issue. I think there really is a danger out there, but I don't think it's good for the right side of the aisle to have this extended. I mean, one of the things that Trump touted was that he was the guy that never didn't start any wars, right? Yeah. And yet we're sitting here, and it looks like, is this Iraq all over again?
Another forever war.
Yeah, and so I think you're going to get a number of independent-minded voters that say, look, we didn't say that there's not bad things and people to deal with outside the world, but we kind of told you after Iraq, maybe we shouldn't think of ourselves as the policemen of the world. And, that's going to have a significant effect. Of course, we know the effect that it has on just, everyday things like gas prices and stuff like that. But
yeah, well, it also caused a pretty significant fracturing of the MAGA coalition. You can talk about Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example.
Well, absolutely. And that's one of the things is like you start seeing the real differences amongst a lot of those folks, the Thomas Masseys or the Rand Pauls, where these are very, small L libertarian perspectives, where the fundamental principle is of non-aggression is what makes them small L libertarians, right? And now you're saying because I'm a Republican, I have to support a president who, forget your opinion on it, whether it was right or wrong, he was the aggressor, right? And now that aggression, and remember it was going to be 2 weeks, and now we're going on a lot longer than that. Yeah, so you may be very supportive of the administration and say, look, this is like fundamental, that this was kind of the basis of us being okay with his second term.
Yeah.
And that's not what happened. We were promised this would not happen.
That's right. If Democrats make large gains in midterm elections, are you concerned that Trump and his allies will try to cast doubt on the results, or even use the military to seize voting machines to prevent duly elected Democrats from being seated? If so, how do we guard against that possibility?
I think they may cast doubt. I'm not as worried about a military intervention as maybe some other folks, only because I think they know the people won't stand for it. Even on their own side of the aisle would not stand for that, right? Unless there was actually demonstrable, like just ridiculous levels of overt fraud. I don't think the American people would stand for it. I think a lot of people have lack of a better terms, kind of accepted him continuing to go out there and say fraud, when it's, part of them just maybe accepting it just because it's part of his bombastic, over-the-top nature.
Yeah.
But I think if you get to the point where they're going to go and utilize the military, I think there's just too many people. I actually do believe democracy is still much stronger here than in most places in the world.
That's good to hear.
And that would unite so many people to say, no, this is a bridge too far. You're not just talking now. You are being the authoritarian you're warning about.
Yeah.
And no, and I don't think you would even get the buy-in from a lot of leadership, frankly.
That's
a lot
good.
of military leadership, I should say.
Good to hear. I hope you're right. Well,
I hope
Chad,
I am too.
yes. Well, Chad, one of our traditions here at Be Bold America is to ask our guests what they think our listeners should keep doing, stop doing, and start doing. Our future depends on it. So in the context of ensuring that every voter gets to have a voice that matters, what do you think we need to keep doing?
I think we need to keep staying engaged and keep thinking about the issues and participating.
And what do you think we need to stop doing?
I think we need to stop being so confident in our own opinions, or at least stop assuming that somebody who doesn't agree with us is either ignorant or stupid or has ill motive, frankly.
Good advice. And finally, what do you think we need to start doing?
Start finding somebody who you may think is on your different political sphere of influence, and find out how you can work on something together.
Excellent. Very good. Well, Chad, the Independent Voter Project is pursuing hugely important election reforms that are essential for ensuring a healthy future for our democracy. Thanks so much for coming on Be Bold America to tell us about it. It's been a real honor to speak with you today, and I wish you the best of luck as you continue your important work.
I appreciate the time and appreciate talking to you. I had a lot of fun.
Very good. As Jill would say, our future depends on it. So what's up next on Be Bold America? Please join me on July 17th for a very important show as I interview Dr. Colette Delawala, founder and CEO of Stand Up for Science. Stand Up for Science is a political activism organization dedicated to defending and advancing America's scientific ecosystem, a cornerstone of democracy, freedom, and progress. With a bold strategy combining activism, messaging campaigns, grassroots organizing, and political advocacy, Stand Up for Science is mobilizing the fight for science and democracy, now and for generations to come. So please join me, Mike Clancy, on Friday, July 17th at 5 p.m. for Mobilizing the Fight for Science and Democracy with Dr. Colette Delawala. As a reminder, Be Bold America is available as a podcast. Now you may listen to the show anytime for free by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform or by joining Be Bold America's news group. To do so, visit JillCodyAuthor.com and complete the pop-up form. I want to give special thank you to our excellent program engineer, Graham Swan, and to our station's program director, Howard Feldstein. You're listening to KSQD Santa Cruz and KSQT Prunedale, Many Voices, One Station. Listen worldwide, online at ksqd.org. My name is Mike Clancy, and I want to thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.